Welcome to Parallax, the resurrection of truth, beauty, and goodness. Parallax, a media war engine. Parallax, the construction amidst eternal decay. Parallax, the portal to the edge of chaos. Parallax, poem and provocation. Parallax, mad philosophers and tantric demigods. Parallax, totem for an unknown god. Parallax, philosophy and the return of the matriarch. Parallax, the end of the meaning crisis. Parallax, the whispering daemon in your ear. Parallax, the god of wisdom, wine and love. Parallax, your home for superior publications, podcasts and courses. Parallax, join us today. Parallax.
Good first question. Yes, it's a pleasure to be on Parallax with you all. I'm really looking forward to the course. Yeah. Well, I think I've talked about this before in various discussions, but for me, I was on the train to New York City and reading Gebser's Ever-Present Origin for the first time. I had a thick, hardbound copy, a blue cover of Ever-Present Origin. Cracked open the first pages, and immediately I was drawn into this idea that origin is present. And Gebser, he's talking about the presence of the future and the presence of the past, but there's this eloquent kind of poetic way, like almost a simple way. He's gesturing towards a kind of openness of time, that somehow time is in relation. And that's really been the idea that's hooked me for past 10, 15 years. I've tried to, I guess you could say my studies for the past decade or so has been trying to figure out what he actually meant by that. How do we live integral time? How do we live in a kind of open and relational present? And how does the kind of a thought exercise, I've been calling it an intellectual thought exercise. What if the past was present, but also what if the future was present? How would we live in the present if the future had a kind of shaping power over us, with us? It's a very ecological sense of time. And yeah, the course is very much an exploration of what that's about. Daily life is always the testing site, right? Where a lot of these ideas get tested and challenged. But I think, for me, it's really very much, Gebser had a very eloquent way of understanding the different modes of time, whether it's timelessness or temporicity or a very kind of directional, will-oriented mode of time. I mean, these are everyday experiences. And these are experiences that I have every day. Relationship with my ancestors and a relationship of where I'm going with my family, right? With the next generations. The presence of the future is certainly present for me as a father, right? As a parent, navigating basically a time of collapse, right? A time of uncertainty and transition. So I would say that the future is very much this pressing concern, is very alive for me. And then it's also very much informing how I kind of move through the everyday, the best of my ability, at least. I think there are times where that sort of slips away, but it's a practice. It's a consistent practice where you have to kind of, like going back to the breath, you have to go back to the present, and explore your relationship with both past and future in the present and seek out where it's alive, if that makes sense. Well, what I was just mentioning, this sort of koan or intellectual exercise, what if the past was present, and also what if the future was present in the same way, is kind of the shape of the course, right? The sort of early lessons are sort of introducing Gebser's approach to the history of consciousness. So it's very much about the past, but the idea here is the ways in which we imagine the past or don't imagine the past will change the way in which we imagine the future. So different stories about how we got here are going to open up or close down different possibilities of where we can go from here. So the whole idea is to kind of reset the narrative a little bit and begin to imagine this much more relational, dynamic time, right? Where the story of our origins is much more nonlinear, much more processual and fluid, where things that we imagine to have come later actually happened much, much earlier. And the idea behind that is to really kind of instill the sense that meta narrative doesn't just have to be for these sort of dusty Enlightenment era narratives about progress or stadial models of history. Like we can have a much more dynamic meta narrative about where we're going, right? And who we are as human beings. So the beginning lessons are really looking at that, very much informed by Gebser. And the later lessons are really kind of helping us land in the present. And so moving from the past, moving this from the sort of meta history to a kind of recent history of the present, trying to understand what Frederick Jameson calls a structure of feeling, right? What are the lived conditions of time in the present? Like, how are we living through a time of collapse and transition where this is Gebser's hypothesis, but very much mine, that time as a theme has become much more intensified. That, as Andreas Malm talks about, the air has become heavy with time. What does that actually mean? And how do, say, contemporary phenomena like the cultural interest and fixation on nostalgia, for instance, are kind of affirming Gebser's hypothesis for the sort of intensification of these temporal themes in everyday life to the point where we're kind of saturated with time, right? And the whole question of the meta crisis is a question of our worldview in relationship with time, right? And the sort of deep fossil fuel evolutionary history leaning into the present, just in terms of the deep long time, but then also in the more recent history, right, the past few hundred years of industrialization, and then of course the future, which keeps kind of shifting. We used to have a sense of the future as progress, and now that's sort of been exchanged for a sense that the future means collapse or catastrophe. But what the class is trying to do is to kind of open up other possibilities by understanding the kind of phenomenology of the present, by understanding the way in which we are already living in a new time, and the nature of the crisis that we're in, the ecological crisis, the climate crisis, and all of the kind of other forms of the poly or meta crisis that we talk about in these circles. They're all exhibiting a kind of temporal quality or characteristic. So it's really a way of kind of bringing to consciousness or raising to consciousness the ways in which a new time is already living us, right? And exploring different possibilities of how we might start to live this new time in a much more agentic, conscious, creative way. Oh, that's a good one. I'm always exploring what this actually means for folks who take my classes and learning from them, how they're seeing what they're doing and how Gebser has, helped them begin to kind of move through the world differently. But I guess I would sum it up as this is a course where we're really trying to explore what planetary agency actually means, what individuation actually means in a time of collapse. How can we restore agency to ourselves, navigating and wayfinding a time of great uncertainty, and begin to live the future in new ways that are part of daily life, that give us a sense that we are, regardless of the outcome, in relation with a better kind of future, a more regenerative future that's lived in the present. So I'm hoping to kind of give folks a healthy dose, not necessarily of optimism, but of possibility, and a sense that human beings or human nature is more capable than perhaps the present narratives are kind of foreclosing around us. So possibility, agency, and a sense of a different kind of future. This is something Shreko Horvath talks about. A different end of the world is possible. So I love folks to explore that and come away with a sense that that is true. Oh, that's a great question too. That could be just because I've been asked this in different ways. This might be a fun kind of bonus discussion. We can just sort of playfully hold for one of the more participatory sessions. But yeah, I think the biggest difference is, Gebser appears on the surface to be this very dense, difficult thinker, very precise, very meticulous. He's looking at language and etymology, etc. He has these structures of consciousness. On the surface, he seems kind of like Wilbur in many ways, right? And then he's kind of creating the system. But I think Gebser's ultimate orientation is not to construct a system. It's to allow thinking and concepts to move much more freely, to go beyond system, to allow thinking to be friendly to that which is beyond system building. So Gebser's not a system builder per se. He wants if we were imagining theory construction to be like architecture, Gebser's very much interested in a kind of Frank Lloyd Wright. Let's open it up and connect in a dynamic way with what we're in relationship with. And I would say, and this is my own discernment with Wilbur, there's a sense with Wilbur that there's a kind of all encompassing, theory of everything, that there's a sort of maximum explanatory potential that this system can offer, right? Where it can explain everything, at least conceptually. And you won't find that in Gebser. You won't find a compulsion towards that in Gebser. And the way he's using system construction and concepts is for very different purposes, is to kind of open us up, to help us kind of land in the world again and engage with the present in a more concrete sense. Again, that's just my discernment, but that tends to be where I draw that distinction.